Hi there. Thanks for joining. My name's Molly. I'm the maker behind Lefty Knits. I'm primarily a knitter, but I am an occasional crocheter, and this channel is where I share what I've been working on recently, what I've made in the past, what yarn I'm getting, design that I'm working on, any sort of knitting pursuits that I've been getting up to recently. So today I want to share 4 knitted pieces and 1 crocheted piece that are among my most worn items. I'm not very good at making like ranked lists or anything, so these are kind of in no particular order, although I think there's one that I am pretty certain I've worn more than anything else. Now, I apologize if I look a little bit dewy today. It's very hot in the Bay Area. We are in the midst of a heat wave. We don't have air conditioning, most of us who live here, and my boyfriend and I don't have it in this apartment. And I've turned off the fan and closed the window to try to make sure that my sound is okay. So I'm gonna try to get through this relatively speedily so that I hopefully don't overheat too badly. Before we get started, I'd love to know what it is that you find yourself reaching for the most out of your handmade wardrobe. Is it something you knit or crocheted, something you sewed? What garment is it? What pattern did you use? I'm always looking for practical things to knit, and I'm sure the rest of us are as well, so I'd love if you shared down below in the comments. The first piece that I find myself reaching for a lot is this Trago cardigan by Melissa Shaswary, or Dandelion Girl Designs. This is knit in Knit Picks Upcycle Reserve worsted in the color Amarillo. It's not available on their website anymore, at least not at the moment of recording. So this is a big long cardigan. I made it with 4 inches of positive ease. So this is a 40-inch bust size, and I have a 30-inch bust, which the pattern actually calls for you to make it with no ease, but I wanted something a little bit bigger and cozier. This is a raglan construction. It's knit seamlessly from the top down, so you cast on stitches at the neckline, and you work increases along the raglan seam here to make the armholes. You separate off the arms and knit the body in stockinette with a seated rib at the bottom, and then you pick up the arms, knit them in like this broken rib texture. Might be like an Andalusian stitch, I'm not actually sure. And then you pick up the collar and knit this like shawl collar afterwards, and it's not written to have any buttons in it, and I did not include any. The nice thing about this is it's cozy, but it's not overly hot because it was made to be knit with a looser gauge. So the gauge for this is 16 stitches per 4 inches in worsted weight yarn. So that's like a pretty loose gauge. You know, usually you find like somewhere like 18 to 20 inches. So it's like relatively open and like loose and flowy. And it works up pretty quickly. I also knit it pretty long, so it covers my butt, which I think is kind of nice sometimes. I finished this in the spring of 2021, and I reach for it a good amount in the colder months. It's a nice layer, it feels good to lounge in. It's getting pretty pilled, which I don't know how well you can see it on camera, and I did try to clean it up and make it a little bit more presentable. It maybe even is getting a little bit felted, sort of on the butt area, which isn't that surprising. This is non-superwash yarn, and I don't tend to mind pilling that much, so that was more down to yarn choice. I think this pattern is a great simple one. It was the first cardigan I ever made. I think the first adult sweater I ever finished, and it was super simple, very easy, with just enough to keep you kind of interested, with the texture going on the sleeves and the seated rib going on at the collar and at the border, the bottom hem. So I would highly recommend this pattern. This one goes up to a 60-inch bust. So if you're looking for a nice knitted cardigan that's easy to throw on, that has a little bit of texture to it, and a little bit to keep it interesting, I would highly recommend this pattern. My next piece that I'll talk about is my Anchors Summer Shirt by Petite Knit. Now, this is a classic. It feels like very, very many people have made these. I'm just one of them. And I made mine in Lana, Grossa, Línea, Pura, Collino, which is a discontinued yarn, but it's 45% cotton, 25% linen, 15% rayon, and 15% polyester. It's like a marl DK yarn, and when I knit it with that, I did not find that I got like a fabric that I liked. I was a little bit open, so I also added Flax Lace by Fiber Natura in a white. This is those two yarns held together, and I knit the size small, which is supposed to have a bust circumference of 35 3/4 inches, but I think it has stretched out a little bit. It seems a little bit bigger than that now, but it's a nice and easy shirt. I made this in the summer of 2021, and I've reached for it a lot throughout that summer and this summer. It's a great layer. It's very like loose and flowy, even though it's a DK weight. It's not too heavy, especially in the Bay Area where it doesn't get super hot, and it's just a really fun pattern to work. It goes pretty fast. The yoke is kind of mostly circular, so you knit these ribbed sections separated by increases worked in stockinette in the round, and then you work a ribbed yoke section. And once you finish the ribbed yoke sections, you do raglan-like increases for a little bit. I did, in this pattern, sub the ribbing on the edges with twisted rib. I was going through a phase at this point where I really liked the look of twisted rib, and I mean, I still think it looks really neat, but I put twisted rib on the edges, the bottom hem, and the sleeve cuffs, and this is just a classic. It's an easy one to reach for. I love this shirt. I wear it all the time, and I think I might make another. I have some cotton yarns that I bought forever ago. They're like deep stash that I had ideas for when I bought them, but I've changed my mind on those patterns. So I think that I will be probably knitting this pattern again in the near future. My third piece is the Trescau pullover by Along Avec Anna. This was the first adult-sized pullover I finished. I knit it in the spring of 2021, around the same time as I knit my Trago cardigan. So I finished my first cardigan and my first pullover for myself or any adult around the same time. I made this in Malabrigo Rios yarn and the colorway Kegwai, and I'm not sure how well it'll show up on camera, but I started to run out of yarn and bought another skein when I was working at the very end of the sleeves. So the sleeves have a slightly more green version of this colorway. I tried to fade it in, and I don't think that it looks super, there's a lot of cat hair on these, I'm sorry. I don't think it looks super, super bad, but, or unintentional, but you definitely can notice it. I've learned to work my sleeves first if I think I might run out of yarn. It felted and it shrunk up a little bit, so the sleeves are a place where you can see it. I think I machine washed this in cold water. I'm fairly certain that I didn't dry it. And this has happened to another piece I knit in Malabrigo yarn, which I'm pretty sure is superwash, but I might be wrong about that. But it's fine. It still fits me, and I think it still looks pretty good. So it's okay. So my gauge was slightly off for this. It's supposed to be 4 inches to 21 stitches, and I had 20 stitches over 4 inches, which isn't that different, but over the course of a pullover it can make a difference. And I also just, the first time I knit most of it, I think I pretty much finished the body, I knit a size that was way too big on top of it for what I prefer. So my bust is 36 inches or so, which is like 91.5 centimeters. And I started out knitting the 100 centimeter size, or the size written to be 100 centimeters, but my gauge was off by that 1 stitch over 4 inches. So it ended up being way bigger. When I tried it on, like there was just a lot of extra fabric under the armpits and it didn't fit the way that I wanted. So I went down when I frogged this to the 90-inch size to get a 95-inch bust is what I calculated it would be. For those of us in the non-metric world, 95 centimeters is about 38 inches. And I think that was actually perfect. It fits super well. And I have been really happy with it. I think this is just like a really nice classic raglan. I like that it has this garter detailing at the edge as opposed to ribbing. I think that's kind of fun, and that the increases for the raglan were done with yarn overs rather than knit front and back or make one left and right. And it has some nice detailing, like it has short rows in the back to raise the back of the neck, and short rows in the back at the bottom to make the bottom a little bit longer. I don't know how apparent that is here. I guess you can see it a little bit. So I think that it fits really well. It's written for like an extremely wide range of sizes. I think the increments are pretty small. I forget exactly how many sizes there are, but it goes from 80 centimeters to 165 centimeters, which is 32 to 66 inches. So there's a lot of sizes to choose from. It's a free pattern too. I know that there's a cardigan version of this as well, and I just highly recommend it. It's a great pattern if you have a DK weight sweater quantity of yarn sitting around that you want to do something for, especially if you're looking for something free to make. From here on out, I'll be moving to some older pieces. So this fourth item is my green moss stitch infinity scarf. I made this in, I think, probably 2016, and I used Red Heart with wool yarn. So it's an acrylic wool blend. It was discontinued, or being discontinued, I think, at the time I bought it. So long discontinued now. It was on the clearance shelf at Michael's, which I walked by every day on my way to and from the train, as I've mentioned in previous podcast episodes. And I bought a bunch of this yarn, some of which I still have, and it's honestly like a pretty nice budget-friendly yarn. So I didn't use a pattern for this. And I just knit it in moss stitch using the American terminology here. So I knit 2 rows, or I did knit 1, purl 1 for 2 rows, and then I did purl 1, knit 1 for 2 rows. I used a provisional cast on and kept it on scrap yarn, and then I did this kind of shitty Kitchener stitch here to make it an infinity scarf as opposed to just a regular scarf. But ultimately, I think it ended up being a really good item for me when I was in Boston. So it's a good length, it wraps around your neck twice and isn't like super choky. It's pretty warm, not very scratchy, and this was in my daily rotation when I lived in Boston. It might not have been the only scarf or the only handmade scarf that I wore, but I wore this a lot with my winter clothes, and I had a hell of a commute where I had to walk to a train, wait for a train, take it, sort of downtown and then wait for a shuttle to take me somewhere else out of town in a different direction than where I lived. So there was a lot of waiting, especially with winter delays. And I remember being annoyed, but I don't remember being cold. So I think that this scarf did its job really well. And obviously I don't wear it as much now that I'm back in California, but it's one that I tend to bring with me if I'm looking for a scarf to bring along, because it's just like a nice warm piece, and I like the color and the stitch pattern that I use. This last one's funny. This is a bonus item because it's crocheted, it's not knitted. And it's definitely seen better days, but I would say that this is my most worn piece ever, bar none. So it's just a headband ear warmer that I made following a random online tutorial for like a cross front headband. So I believe that this is half double crochet, and what I did was make a long strip that was like half the length of this and make it so that when I put it around my head and doubled it, and then I crossed it in the front, I was able to like have it fit over my head. So basically it was just extra long, and I wrapped it around my head twice with a twist. And then I sewed it together along the vertical and the horizontal seams, if that makes sense. This was a long time ago. I'm not actually sure what the tutorial was, but if people are interested, I could probably make one myself, even though my crochet is a little bit rusty. The yarn I used was Patton's Wool Roving, which is like a bulky unspun yarn that you can find generally at like Michael's, or I think probably on Yarnspirations these days. This is another yarn that I got from the Michael's that I walked by every day, and it is 100% wool, but I found it a little bit itchy, so sorry, it's like stained these days, but I found it itchy on my head, so I sewed in this fleece lining. I hand sewed it. I am not a sewist. It doesn't look great on the inside, but it's secure and it worked really well, and did the trick to make it both less scratchy and more warm. So I probably made this in 2015 or 2016. I'm not sure when, but I think for 2 or maybe 3 winters I wore this like every day. I made and wore a few hats, but I like to have my hair in ponytails a lot, so an ear warmer was easier, and it fit over like underneath my hood a lot better, because most of the hats I made had pom-poms or something on the back. So between a ponytail and a pom-pom, sometimes my hood sort of stuck out weirdly and didn't cover my face as much. And with this, I was able to put it on my head and still tighten my hood really close around my head to keep it warmer and to keep the wind and snow and rain out. This is what the headband looks like on. Now, obviously I don't wear this as much now that I'm back in California, but I take it on trips with me like every time I go somewhere where it will probably be chillier. So it's something that I still get a good amount of use out of, like the green infinity scarf. And it's just something that I'm really proud of. So I think that this headband is a good reminder that sometimes you don't need a fancy pattern and fancy yarn to make something that's like super functional for your wardrobe. I followed a free tutorial. I got the yarn at a big box craft store, and this is the thing that I probably have used the most in my wardrobe out of anything that I've ever knit, because it filled a hole that I really needed filled by something, and I liked crafting, so I wanted to fill it with something that I made. I don't know if I knew that I would wear it as much as I did when I made it, but it was like a very functional piece, And I think sometimes it's nice to remember that, like, even though it's really fun to make fancy knitted items or crocheted items or sewn items, sometimes the thing that you need most is like much simpler than the fancy stuff. This piece is something that I was very happy with. It served me super well for many years. And if you are interested in me creating some sort of tutorial for this, I might be able to. So let me know. So that's it. Those are the items that I find myself reaching for the most, or some of the items that I find myself reaching for the most. If you'd like to see more items I find myself reaching for a lot, I would gladly oblige. I have many more items that I reach for relatively consistently, or have over the years, especially back in Boston when knitwear was a consistent thing that I needed accessory-wise to keep myself warm. As I said at the beginning of this video, I'd love to hear what items you find yourself reaching for most out of the things that you've made for your own wardrobe. If you want to follow along with items that I'm working on now, or see some other items that I made in the past and older photos, you can follow me on Instagram and TikTok at lefty.knits. Thanks so much for joining, and have a great rest of your day.